Hi, I am Sherlock. Welcome to my new mystery case.
It was one of those mornings when the London fog sits low as if to overhear the city's private affairs, draping Baker Street in a grey muffler through which even the cries of the newspaper boys came softened and remote. I had called upon my old friend with a mind to entice him into a walk, for the autumn damp had been making free with my shoulder. Holmes, however, was already occupied. I found him cross-legged upon the settee, a violin bow balanced idly across his knees, his keen eyes fixed upon the smudge of soot that clung to the inner rim of our fireplace like a signature. "You have had a restless patient, Watson," he said, without looking round. A man who waits until the small hours to summon a consultation, and who lacks the courage to climb the steps without first rehearsing his story twice on the pavement. "You can deduce all that from the hearth?" I laughed. "From the hearth, the hat-stand, and your boots," he returned. "There is river mud, dried on the medial welt, not of yesterday's tide, too pale, but of last night's. The trail is broken by a taxi's dripping axle upon our mat, and there—" He pointed with the bow to a dull patch on the mahogany umbrella rack. "You see where a cheap glove, damp with anxiety and a drizzle not yet turned to rain, rested for the space of a hesitant minute." "Then you are prepared to be consulted?" "I am always prepared to be interested," Holmes replied. "It is only the degree that varies." As if conjured by the remark, there came a brisk knock below and a measured tread upon the stairs. Mrs. Hudson admitted 2 visitors. Inspector Lestrade, spare and wiry as ever, and behind him a gentleman whose careful neatness, black frock coat, discreet mourning band upon the hat, spoke of the museum world rather than commerce or law. The newcomer had that peculiar pallor which attends a sleepless night spent under gaslight. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," said Lestrade with a nod, "we have a case for you, if you'll take it. This is Mr. Julius Plimpton, curator of medieval arms at the Royal Kensington Museum of Antiquities." Mr. Plimpton bowed with the gravity of a man who has rehearsed his words and fears they may yet desert him. "A death, Mr. Holmes," he said, "a death within a locked room, and under circumstances so—" He groped for the phrase, his lips trembling. "So theatrical that I would sooner call them profane." Holmes indicated a chair and waved away the inspector's attempt at an apology. "Pray proceed, Mr. Plimpton. The sooner we are in possession of the bones, the sooner we may clothe them." "Shortly after 1 o'clock this morning," said the curator, folding his hands, "our night watchman, Tom Beddoes, made his round of the North Gallery, where the armoury is housed. All was secure. At 1:13, he is precise in this, he heard a whisper. Not a footfall, not the creak of a hinge, but a whisper, as of a voice speaking, from a cavity. It seemed to issue, so he swears, from the exhibit we have labelled the Iron Mask of Saint-Aubin. Ah, Holmes's eyes brightened. A prisoner's mask? A visorless iron hood of the 17th century, Mr. Holmes, with a narrow lip of breathing slits and a concealed catch at the base, a piece of continental severity. It arrived 2 months ago from a private collection in Lyon, and has excited a morbid interest with the public. Beddoes, unnerved, called to the porter. Together they unlocked the gallery door. The room was in darkness, save for the night lamps. They advanced, and there— The man's tongue faltered again. There, in the curatorial chair, sat Sir Percival Armitage, our chairman of trustees, motionless, and with the iron mask upon his head. Lestrade cleared his throat. Stone dead. Holmes neither started nor sighed, but his fingers tightened upon the bow until the hair creaked. "You saw the body yourself, Inspector?" "I did," said Lestrade. "I was at the museum by 2:30. "The room, Mr. Plimpton?" Was it secured? The armoury door was locked when Beddoes heard the whisper, and remained locked when he fetched the porter. The windows are barred, the skylight is bolted from within, and the only key to the case that houses the mask is kept on my own ring. He drew a bunch of keys from his pocket and rattled them ruefully. It has not left me since yesterday afternoon. The catch of the mask? Found fastened, Lestrade put in. We had to work the concealed spring to remove it. And Sir Percival's condition? Holmes rose and paced to the mantel, gazing into the grate with that abstracted air which signalled the quickening of his remarkable faculties. No marks of violence, save a faint bruise at the left temple, said Lestrade. No ligature, no blood. A doctor called it apoplexy at first glance until he saw the skin. The face, so far as we could view it when the mask was removed, showed a sort of ashy mottling, not the usual. Smell? Asked Holmes. Carbolic hangs about the galleries, Mr. Plimpton answered. We cleanse the cases weekly. Anything else? The curator hesitated. A perfume, perhaps, a sweet, faint note, like violets, but I confess the hour had made a coward of my senses. Holmes's mouth assumed that narrow line which in him did duty for a smile. You do yourself an injustice, sir. A curator who doubts his senses is safer than one who worships them. Pray continue. We found Sir Percival seated at my desk, his walking-stick leaning against the leg, his gloves in his pocket, one glove to be exact, for the right was missing. A single candle had guttered out upon the brass sconce, although the lamps should have sufficed. On the green baize lay a slip of paper with two Latin words, muta ferea, written in a hand I did not recognize. The iron is mute, I translated. Holmes nodded absently. Or mute iron, continue. The case label for the mask had been moved from its bracket and set upon the desk also. Our inventory shows no loss. Every piece is accounted for. But Mr. Plimpton swallowed. The door to the little service stair which leads to the roof was bolted from within the gallery. I myself drew the bolt. Let us be precise, said Holmes. You have a sealed room, a whisper heard at 13 minutes past 1, a gentleman discovered seated and masked, a bruise, an odour of violets, a stray glove, and a Latin note. Was there any disturbance of dust, any footprint upon the boards? Lestrade's expression turned sour. That is the devil of it, Mr. Holmes. The floor has been newly waxed for the season. No prints, save a queer, shallow scuff by the case, like a shoe that has been wrapped in cloth. The chimney grate shows old ash, but there's a smear of black on the inner tiles, as if someone had put a sooty object down and picked it up again. The clock in the gallery, the small French piece over the entrance, had stopped at 1:13. The time of the whisper, I murmured. Or the time a cautious hand stopped it, said Holmes. He turned suddenly. Sir Percival, what sort of man? Punctilious, said Mr. Plimpton. Acid of tongue, generous with funds, and a terror to idle staff. He kept the museum in awe. His enemies were numerous by the nature of his office, but his principles were sound. Enemies, names. The dealer who sold us the mask, for one, Lestrade answered. A Frenchman called Lenoir. Sir Percival had accused him, quietly, mind you, of having dressed up a fraud as a rarity. There was to be a report. And then there is Lady Aurelia Vale, a patroness with a dramatic taste for the Middle Ages, who has quarrelled with Sir Percival over the placement of her loan. She was at our preview yesterday evening and made a scene. Finally, our night watchman Beddoes, who is sober but imaginative. Imagination is only undisciplined observation, Holmes murmured. He set the violin bow aside and reached for his overcoat. Watson, your hat. Inspector, I should like very much to make the acquaintance of your whispering iron. "You will come at once?" asked Mr. Plimpton, relief breaking over his features. "At once," said Holmes. He paused at the doorway and turned back to the hearth, where a faint crescent of ash had caught his eye. With a long finger, he traced the curve in the residue and held it up to the light. "A pity," he said softly, "that London's fog does not content itself with our streets. It creeps indoors and writes its little riddles upon our grates." "What do you make of it?" I asked, as we followed Lestrade down the stairs. "That when iron is said to be mute, it has almost certainly spoken," he returned. "The question is to whom, and by what channel. We shall listen where others have looked." The fog clung to the hansom's glass as we rattled toward Kensington. Holmes, chin buried in his scarf, kept that tight silence which means his thoughts are already in possession of details we have yet to meet. Lestrade, opposite, reported the doors guarded and the staff detained. Mr. Plimpton's keys chattered in his hand like nervous teeth. "If your gallery holds its tongue as poorly," Holmes remarked, "we shall not be long." Under gaslight, the museum had a chapel's gravity. Our steps softened beneath the dome. A gentle draught wandered the tiles. The North Gallery's air carried unmistakably a sweetness that did not belong to disinfectant. Holmes paused at the threshold and drew breath along the cornice rather than the room. "Violet expressed in something volatile," he murmured. "Observe that the cooler eddy hugs the roofline. A draught has been engineered." Sir Percival's chair remained. The green shade pooled its calm light. The exhibit label lay apart. The slip of Latin, muta feria, waited in a crabbed upright hand. Holmes never touches such bait at first offering. He moved with that skating glide that tells me he is listening through his boots. The waxed boards were immaculate, save for a pale, shallow swathe curving from the armour case toward the chair and dying at the rug's fringe. He went to his knee, lens in hand, and indicated several blue fibres caught in a seam by the skirting. "You're polishing flannel?" "The same," said the curator. "Then our visitor contrived to borrow silence from your housekeeping." Holmes rose to the brass sconce, whose candle had guttered and held the light obliquely. A varnished skin flashed. He touched, pressed, and smelt. "Collodion. Ether's breath remains. Our Violet rides this carriage." "You suppose someone perfumed a candle?" I asked. "I suppose someone required a moving current to carry a scent at a chosen moment," said he. "A whisper is an event in air. It prefers a path." We examined the case. The iron mask of Saint-Aubin glowered with blind slits and a trap's meanness at the jaw. Holmes tried the lock, tapped the glass, then pried delicately along the plinth seam and drew forth a filament so fine I mistook it for cobweb. Stretched across his palm, it proved a hair, uniform grey, without the uneven lustre of age. "A wig," he said. "Lenoir," grunted Lestrade. "A dealer keeps two faces." "Facts at the registry, Inspector, not the altar," Holmes returned. He called for a ladder, mounted to the skylight, and verified the bolt. Along the frame lay a dusting of black, as if a sooty cord had been drawn and lifted. He examined the small French clock above the entrance, pinched the pendulum, and produced from the case a folded paper wedge. "Your gallery stopped at 1:13 because someone willed it so." Sir Percival lay in a side chamber. Holmes uncovered the head and regarded the faint bruise at the left temple. A narrow, horizontal indentation crossed the brow that did not match the mask's rim. At the nostrils, a delicate crystalline grit caught the lamp. "You see, Watson, ether evaporates and leaves a salt. The mottling you described, Inspector, is irregular, not the loud signature of strangulation. I think of vapour, persuasion delivered to the face. "Poison?" I ventured. "A breath rather than a draught," he said. He replaced the sheet and stood a moment listening to the house. Back in the gallery he halted beneath a small, dusty grille set above the wainscot. "Your whisper had no obligation to enter by the door. If this vent has a sister mouth elsewhere, a voice near it would materialize here with the intimacy of confession." Mr. Plimpton brightened. "A warm air duct connects the reading room to this gallery," he said, "for the winter. Then the reading room must confess." Holmes stooped at the rug's edge and lifted it. A small crescent of soot darkened the board. Something sooty was set down and taken up again, cord, tube, or glove. Our missing glove, Inspector, would spare a hand while handling collodion or treated wick. Lestrade's patience thinned. "And the watchman?" "The first witness to impossibility must be heard before memory adorns him," said Holmes. He considered the iron head a last time. "If this mask is mute, it is the studied silence of a stage. Come, Watson. Inspector, bring Beddoes. We shall begin at the whisper's other mouth and let the room's theatrics explain themselves to us tonight." We followed a corridor of Roman shards to a stair that smelt of coke and oil. The porter's lamp threw silhouettes ahead. In the reading room, a stove ticked as it cooled. Above it, twin grills matched the galleries, meshes furred with dust. Holmes climbed a chair, set his lips to the lattice, and breathed a syllable. A twin returned from the gallery, distant yet near. "Adequate," he said. "A whisperer needs only a stage-hand's trick and a willing tube." He stepped down. "Send for Beddoes. Mr. Plimpton will show us the furnace mouth. Watson will time a candle's draught." Lestrade rang, and the museum silence gathered for our experiment. The watchman was summoned to us within the hour, his boots squeaking upon the marble floor, as though even his footwear bore a conscience. Tom Beddoes was a wiry fellow with a lantern jaw and that restless shifting of the eyes which belongs to men who spend long nights in solitary halls. He stood twisting his cap between his fingers until Holmes's gaze, piercing yet oddly courteous, compelled him to stillness. "You heard a whisper at 1:13, Holmes began. "You are certain of the time?" "Certain as sunrise, sir," Beddoes replied. "The gallery clock had just struck, and I always glance at it. Habit of mine. I'd passed the armour case no more than a minute before. Nothing amiss then. Next round. There it was, like a sigh, but words too, low, as though someone were speaking under water. I near dropped my lamp." Holmes inclined his head. "Repeat it." Beddoes frowned, recalling. "Couldn't swear to language, sir. More the shape of speech than sense. Like when a gent mutters in his sleep. But it came clear from that mask." His shoulders quivered. "I know how it sounds." "On the contrary," Holmes said, "accuracy is the most respectable of sounds. Did you enter at once?" "Not alone, sir. I fetched the porter, Mr. Wilkes. When we came back, the door was locked, same as before. I unlocked it. My key fits the outer latch, but only Mr. Plimpton's opens the cases. We went in, and there he was." Holmes's long fingers tapped his chin. "And the candle?" "Burning, sir. Or near burnt. Smelt queer, but I thought it was the Polish. When the flame went out, that's when I noticed the perfume." Holmes dismissed him gently, then turned to me. "Watson, you observe? The witness describes not words, but the effect of words, a form, an intonation. Such is the art of ventriloquism. When air is enlisted as accomplice, truth may masquerade as ghost." We followed the curator down to the furnace chamber. The air grew stifling. The iron beast of a stove throbbed and hummed. Holmes directed us to the vent's base. The grill, though caked with soot, bore a fresh smear along the rim as if a hand, gloved or wrapped, had steadied itself there. He drew a slip of paper from his pocket, touched it to the edge, and it came away black. A voice introduced here would carry to the gallery duct, modulated by distance, Holmes said. But a whisper is fragile. To sustain it, one requires both the draught of heated air and the audience's expectation of marvels. Our culprit is stage manager as much as murderer. Lestrade snorted. Or a lunatic with a taste for theatrics. Lunacy leaves chaos, Inspector. This leaves symmetry. Our Latin slip, our violet odour, our candle timed to expire, all arranged as notes in a score. A mind directs this, and a cultivated one. Holmes examined the ash bin, lifting fragments with his tongs. Amongst the grey powder he found a crumpled shred of cloth, scorched at the edge. It was blue, the same hue as the fibres he had shown us in the gallery seam. He slipped it into his envelope without a word. We ascended again. The night air outside the windows pressed pale and watchful against the panes. Holmes walked slowly to Sir Percival's chair and stood a long moment, head bowed as though in deference to the dead. Then suddenly he bent, prized apart the stuffing of the cushion, and extracted a minute splinter of glass. "Ground finely," he said, holding it beneath the lamplight, of the sort used in optical apparatus. "Tell me, Mr. Plimpton, who among your trustees or donors cultivates the sciences, chemistry, optics, or the like?" The curator hesitated. "Why, Lady Aurelia Vale is fond of demonstrations. She collects lantern slides, microscopes, phials of peculiar stones. Her entertainments are elaborate." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "And she quarrelled with Sir Percival yesterday evening?" "She did, and bitterly, over the placement of her loan in the west alcove." "Excellent. Then tomorrow we shall pay Lady Aurelia a call, but tonight—" He replaced the glass shard in his envelope and looked about him with renewed vigour. "Tonight we consider Lenoir, the dealer. If the mask is fraudulent, Sir Percival's report would ruin him. But if a fraud, why risk it displayed at all? Unless—" His voice thinned into abstraction. "Unless the mask is not fraud, but instrument." I stared at the iron face glowering from its case, and for the first time felt that uncanny chill of which Beddoes had spoken. Holmes gathered his coat about him. "Inspector, secure the museum. No one enters without your authority. Tomorrow we shall test the mask, the candle, and the duct in concert. Until then, allow imagination no more power than the facts permit, for imagination, when undisciplined, is murder's favourite accomplice." With that, we departed into the fog, the whisper of the iron mask still riding upon the night air, unresolved yet beckoning us toward its hidden design. The fog had not lifted by morning, but lay upon London like a pall, smothering the cries of the milkman and lending the city a curious hush, as though the air itself were waiting to hear what new secret the day would yield. Holmes was already at the table when I descended, his plate untouched, his fingers restless about a slip of paper he had scrawled upon in the small hours. His eyes, dark with concentration, met mine only briefly before fastening again upon the lines of his notes. "You slept?" I asked. "Briefly," he returned. "But the mind, Watson, requires less slumber than the body when it is fed upon enigma. Observe, the mask, the duct, the candle, the note. 4 devices, each capable of standing alone, yet conjoined in orchestration. This is not murder born of impulse, it is performance." "You believe Lady Aurelia capable of such theatrics?" "She has the temperament, perhaps, but not the discipline. A woman of society delights in spectacle, yet leaves behind the fingerprints of her vanity. What I seek, Watson, is not vanity, but control, the hand of one who relishes precision." As he spoke, Mrs. Hudson entered with the morning post. Among the ordinary envelopes lay a heavy cream card embossed with a crest. Holmes slit it with the bread knife, scanning swiftly. His brows rose. Well, the day answers before we have asked. Lady Aurelia Vale invites us to tea this afternoon at her residence in Belgravia. A curious coincidence, given her quarrel of last evening. Coincidence? I echoed. Or foresight? The guilty are fond of drawing their hunters close, trusting in charm or diversion. We shall attend. At the appointed hour we arrived at Lady Aurelia's house, a tall, white-fronted building whose steps were already adorned with carriages. The hall smelled of lilies and lamp oil, the kind of lavish household where servants move noiselessly and every mirror reflects a calculated splendor. Lady Aurelia herself descended upon us in a rustle of violet silk, her eyes bright as glass. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," she said, with a smile that revealed both welcome and challenge. "And Dr. Watson, how good of you to answer my invitation. I felt certain you would be curious after all the unpleasantness at the museum." "You are remarkably well informed," Holmes said, bowing. "London is a village, Mr. Holmes. I heard of poor Sir Percival's demise before I had even dismissed my maid this morning." She ushered us into a drawing-room already full of society figures, critics, dilettantes, young men with glossy hair, and women whose laughter trembled like chandeliers. At the centre stood a magic lantern upon its stand, its lenses polished to brilliance. A series of slides rested in a velvet case. Lady Aurelia gestured proudly. "I am to give a demonstration this evening," she said, "a journey through the cathedrals of France. But I confess, Sir Percival and I disagreed over whether such devices belong to the realm of education or entertainment. He maintained that museums must preserve only the past, whereas I—" She laid a delicate hand upon the lantern. "See no harm in animating it." Holmes leaned closer to the apparatus, his face unreadable. "An excellent instrument. May I?" Without waiting for leave, he adjusted the brass, peering into the slot. When he straightened, his expression carried that peculiar stillness which I knew signaled discovery. We remained for half an hour, enduring polite chatter and elaborate compliments, but Holmes's attention never wandered far from Lady Aurelia and her lantern. As we departed, she pressed his hand warmly. "You must return when I give my lecture. Perhaps then you will tell me whether art and science may be married without scandal." Once outside, Holmes hailed a cab at once, his manner brisk. "Back to Kensington, Watson? We must test a hypothesis before Lestrade tramples it with his boots." The museum was colder in daylight, its treasures dulled by the ashen light that seeped through skylights. Lestrade awaited us, his temper short. "Well, Mr. Holmes, I trust you've had your tea with the lady. While you sipped, I took the liberty of searching her lodgings. Nothing to show for it, no masks, no poison phials, no letters. A woman with nothing but dresses and debts." Holmes ignored the barb. "Bring the mask from its case." The curator obeyed, setting the iron hood upon the baize table. Holmes examined the interior again, tracing with a gloved finger the rim where brow would meet metal. Then he drew from his pocket the splinter of glass we had found in the cushion and held it against the curve. It fitted precisely into a shallow notch invisible to the eye. "Observe," Holmes said, "this mask has been adapted. A lens, or rather a filter of ground glass, was affixed here. Its purpose? To deliver a substance directly to the victim's breath. Coupled with a volatile carried by candle vapor, it would induce collapse without a mark of violence." Lestrade frowned. "And how do you prove such a device was used?" Holmes gestured for the sconce to be relit. He placed a fresh candle, treated with a trace of ether, upon the holder. Within minutes, the air grew heavy with that same faint sweetness. I felt my temples throb. Holmes signalled for it to be extinguished at once. "Imagine," he said quietly, Sir Percival seated here, already weary, already quarrelsome. The candle gutters, a whisper chills his ear through the duct, and the mask, freshly handled, delivers its hidden vapour. A theatre of death, Inspector, crafted not for concealment but for effect. Mr. Plimpton clasped his hands in horror. But who would devise such cruelty? Holmes's eyes were hard. One who understands optics, chemistry, and spectacle. One who quarrelled openly with the victim yet hides her true knowledge behind the screen of entertainment. You mean Lady Aurelia? I said. She is a candidate, Holmes replied. But not the only one. Remember Lenoir, the dealer. He, too, traffics in curiosities and artifices, and somewhere in this design is a missing glove that will not be mute. He folded the glass fragment away and drew on his coat. Tonight we rest, Watson. Tomorrow we confront both the lady and the dealer. Let us see which one proves more fluent in the language of mute iron. Morning came sullen and grey, with the drizzle pattering upon the panes and the cries of the costermongers half swallowed by the mist. I found Holmes already awake, hunched at the window with his dressing-gown about him, his violin lying idle across the sill. He had smoked through the night, judging by the forest of cigarette stubs crowded in the ashtray, yet his gaze was as sharp as if sleep were a trifling indulgence for lesser men. "Watson," he said without turning, "the play advances. Yesterday we learned what could be done with iron, ether, and glass. Today we must learn who possessed the will to do it. Between Lady Aurelia and Monsieur Lenoir lies the truth, but they do not share the stage willingly. One performs with lanterns and applause, the other with ledgers and shadows. The murderer, however, demands both science and theatre. Which is the better actor? I suggested we might begin with Lenoir, since the dealer was bound by commerce rather than society, and perhaps less guarded. Holmes approved, and after a hasty breakfast we hailed a cab southward to Clerkenwell, where the man conducted his trade. The shop was a dim cavern of curiosities, where halberds leaned against gilded icons and rusted gauntlets, jostled with Moorish lamps. Lenoir himself emerged from the gloom, a compact figure with sleek hair and eyes that glistened like polished jet. "Messieurs," he purred, bowing, "I regret that we meet under such sombre clouds. The death of Sir Percival, it is a misfortune, yes? Yet what would you? He was an old man, not so?" Holmes fixed him with that deceptively languid gaze that belied the ferocity behind it. "Old, yes, but not inclined to place his head voluntarily into an iron mask, particularly one supplied by you. You are aware that Sir Percival intended to expose the piece as fraudulent?" Lenoir's smile tightened. "A rumour only, monsieur. The mask is authentic, signed and sealed with papers of provenance. He may have doubted, but doubt is the merchant's plague. I sold it in good faith." Holmes moved among the relics, his fingers hovering but never touching. "And yet," he said softly, "it has been altered. A notch for glass, a scent introduced, a mechanism of theatre. That too was in your good faith?" For the first time the dealer's expression faltered. He spread his hands with Gallic resignation. "Altered? That is impossible. I received it as you see it. If someone tampered, it was after it left my custody." Holmes wheeled suddenly, his voice edged with steel. "And the glove, monsieur, the right glove of Sir Percival, vanished from his person. Was it not you who visited the museum 2 nights before the death, under pretext of verifying the display? Did you not linger alone in the armoury while Mr. Plimpton fetched a document? And was it not you who deals in not only arms but the chemicals required to preserve them?" The man's lips moved, but no words issued. Holmes regarded him a moment longer, then turned away with a curt, "We shall see you again." Outside, his expression bore no triumph. "He dissembles, Watson, but whether through guilt or self-preservation we cannot yet tell. Still he supplied the mask and therefore supplied the stage. Whether he also wrote the script remains to be learned. By afternoon we returned to Belgravia, for Lady Aurelia had pressed her invitation for Holmes to witness her lantern lecture. The drawing-room had been transformed, chairs set in rows, curtains drawn against the pallid light, and the lantern arranged like an idol at the front. The guests were a mixture of fashionable youths and weary patrons, but all eyes turned to the hostess as she took her place beside the apparatus. Holmes and I sat at the rear. He leaned close and whispered, "Observe her hands, Watson. They are steady as a surgeon's. This is no dilettante." The slides began. Gothic arches, painted glass, spires that gleamed under artificial sun. Lady Aurelia narrated with eloquence, her voice rich with learned cadence. Yet more than once I noticed Holmes's gaze stray not to the images, but to the lantern itself, as though he watched for some hidden mechanism to betray her. Midway through, a servant entered, with a tray of wine. As glasses were passed, Holmes refused his, murmuring, "Not yet, Watson." He leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the brass cylinder, where the slides were inserted. When the final picture dissolved into darkness, applause filled the room. Lady Aurelia bowed gracefully, basking in her triumph. Holmes rose, his tall figure casting a shadow across the velvet-draped machine. "A most impressive exhibition, madam. Yet I wonder, have you ever employed your lantern not merely to show cathedrals, but to alter perception itself? To dose the air with vapour, perhaps, while the audience sat rapt before your images?" The laughter that followed was indulgent, as though Holmes had posed an eccentric jest. But Lady Aurelia's eyes hardened for a heartbeat before the smile returned. "Mr. Holmes," she said lightly, "your imagination outpaces even your reputation. If you suspect my lantern of witchcraft, pray examine it. You will find nothing but lenses and light." Holmes inclined his head but did not step forward. Instead he said, "Very well, but understand, madam, that the mask at Kensington bore the same union of optics and artifice, and you alone among Sir Percival's circle display such mastery. A dangerous coincidence." A murmur ran through the assembly. Lady Aurelia's laugh cut it short. "Dangerous? I am a patron of learning, sir, not an assassin. If Sir Percival fell victim to his own intemperance, it is not I who must answer." Holmes's face was unreadable as we departed, but once within the cab his voice came quick and low. "Watson, did you note the faint violet trace upon her glove as she handled the slides? The same odour we encountered in the gallery. And yet—" He broke off, drumming his fingers. "And yet the glove in her possession was left not right. The missing article is right, and that, I suspect, lies still hidden with the true author." I pressed him for his meaning, but he only muttered, "Two actors share this stage. One supplies the props, the other directs the scene. Until I catch them together, the play cannot end." We drove back through the rain, the whisper of the iron mask still alive in our minds, and I knew the curtain was only beginning to rise on the darker act yet to come. The rain had slackened by the time we reached Baker Street, yet the mist clung stubbornly to the gas lamps, painting the street in a watery glow. Holmes said little as we ascended to our rooms, but the tautness in his stride betrayed the workings of his mind. He cast off his coat, lit his pipe, and stood before the fire, his silhouette carved sharply by the flames. "Watson," he said at last, "we stand upon a threshold. Both Aurelia and Lenoir are entangled in this affair, yet the knot is not easily undone. The lady possesses the knowledge, the artistry, the dealer, the access, and the motive. Either alone might contrive a deception, but together they compose an orchestra of murder." "And yet," I said, "we cannot accuse either without proof. Mere suspicion will not do." "Precisely. which is why tonight we must coax the hand that moves behind the mask into revealing itself. He gestured toward the small table where he had laid out the evidence thus far, the shard of ground glass, the fibres of blue cloth, and the envelope containing the soot-stained scrap. He placed them carefully in line, as a general might arrange regiments on a map. These are not disparate trifles, Watson. They are rehearsed cues in a play. If we can determine who directed them, the curtain will fall. He then scribbled a note and sent it off by messenger to Lestrade. When I asked its purpose, Holmes only smiled thinly. An invitation. If the guilty believe we close upon them, they will either flee or attempt one final performance. Either course shall betray them. That evening Lestrade arrived, looking more harried than ever. "Your note said urgency, Holmes. I hope you've more than candles and perfumes to show me, for my superiors grow impatient." "You shall have spectacle enough, Inspector," Holmes replied. "But you must play your part. Tomorrow you will announce, truthfully or otherwise, that Sir Percival's death is now considered murder by poison, and that the mask is to undergo public examination at the museum before the trustees. Spread it to the papers if you can. Our culprit thrives on drama. Let us give them a stage." Lestrade frowned, but agreed. "If it brings the snake out of its hole, I'll oblige. But mind, Holmes, if this collapses on hearsay, I'll not be the one left holding the rope." When the inspector departed, I turned to my friend. "You mean to provoke them into acting again?" "Exactly. A murderer of this design cannot resist a final act. The whisper in the mask was but rehearsal. Tomorrow shall be the performance proper. We must be ready." The next day dawned clear but cold, the sun slicing through the fog with a brittle light. By noon, the museum had gathered an unusual company: trustees, scholars, reporters eager for scandal, and of course Lady Aurelia herself, resplendent in violet silk once more. At the periphery lurked Lenoir, his dark eyes watchful beneath the brim of his hat. Holmes and I stood near the armour case, while Lestrade maintained his uneasy command of the hall. Mr. Plimpton called the assembly to order. "It is most irregular," he began, "but in light of last week's tragedy, we are resolved to establish beyond doubt the authenticity and integrity of this exhibit." Holmes whispered to me, "Watch the faces, Watson. The guilty man or woman will not welcome so bright a lantern turned upon their handiwork." The case was unlocked and the iron mask lifted out, heavy and terrible even in daylight. Holmes examined it before the crowd, turning it with a showman's precision. "You see, ladies and gentlemen, the exterior is but iron, 17th century work. Yet within, alterations betray a modern hand. Here, the notch where a lens was fixed. Here, residue of volatile chemical. And here," he produced the glass shard, "the missing piece recovered from Sir Percival's very chair." A ripple of unease passed through the room. I saw Lady Aurelia's gloved hands tighten on her fan, and Lenoir shift uneasily in his stance. Holmes continued, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "The death of Sir Percival was no apoplexy. He was smothered by vapour, introduced through this very mask, accompanied by an elaborate deception of candle and whisper. The question remains, whose design was it?" Lestrade stepped forward as if to demand an answer, but in that moment a commotion broke out near the rear. Lenoir had attempted to push through the throng, only to be seized by a constable. His face gleamed with sweat. "You fools!" he cried, his accent thickening under strain. "I sold the mask, yes, but it was not my hand that doctored it. She took it from me, demanded alterations. Ask her. She has the mind for trickery, not I." He pointed a trembling finger straight at Lady Aurelia. All eyes turned. The lady rose to her feet, colour burning in her cheeks. "Lies! I never touched that wretched object. Monsieur Lenoir seeks only to shield himself. He fears exposure of his fraud." Holmes raised a hand, commanding silence. His eyes blazed with cold fire. "Indeed, both speak fragments of truth. Lenoir supplied the mask, Aurelia provided the science. Together you contrived this spectacle. But murder is not so easily divided. Which of you placed the mask upon Sir Percival, and which whispered death through the duct? That, ladies and gentlemen, we shall soon determine." The hall buzzed like a hive disturbed, and I knew the moment of revelation was close. Holmes stood tall, the mask in his grasp, every eye upon him, while the guilty struggled to conceal the tremor that would betray them when the final card was played. The room had grown taut with silence, broken only by the rustle of dresses and the distant clatter of carriage wheels outside. Holmes stood with the mask held high, its blind iron face catching the light like a sinister relic of judgment. Lady Aurelia's breath came quick, though she strove to hide it behind her fan, while Lenoir, pale with fury and fear, spat words in rapid French that drew startled looks from the trustees. Lestrade barked for order, and the constables tightened their hold on the dealer's arms. Yet Holmes did not speak at once. He let the tension thicken as if he were the conductor of some terrible symphony, allowing the final note to hang unplayed until all ears strained for it. At last he lowered the mask to the table and fixed both Aurelia and Lenoir with that gaze of piercing intensity I had seen unnerve-hardened criminals. "It is useless," he said quietly, "for either of you to wriggle upon the hook. Both of your hands are upon this device. Both of your minds are in its design. But murder, like any drama, requires an actor upon the stage. One of you whispered death through the vent, while the other merely arranged the scenery." Lady Aurelia drew herself up, the violet plume in her hat trembling. "This is preposterous. You accuse a woman of rank and education of such monstrous villainy. My only crime is that I quarrelled with Sir Percival in public, as did half this board of trustees." Holmes inclined his head. "True, madam. And yet your quarrel was no trivial squabble. Sir Percival had prepared a report denouncing your lantern exhibitions as trifles unworthy of scholarly halls. He meant to end your influence over the museum. To a woman whose life is performance, the threat of obscurity is as sharp as a dagger. You required not merely his silence, but a spectacle, his death transformed into an enigma that would echo across London." Lenoir jerked violently against his captors, his voice hoarse. "She lies. It was she who came to me weeks ago demanding alterations to the mask. She spoke of fitting a plate of ground glass, of making it, what was the word, dramatic. I supplied the mask, yes, but I am no murderer. She paid me handsomely, and I obeyed." Holmes turned his keen eyes on him. "And yet, monsieur, you forget one detail. When we searched the furnace vent, what did we discover? A scrap of blue cloth scorched at the edge, the very fabric of the polishing rag used in your shop. Your hand was upon the mechanism, just as surely as hers upon the theory. Without you, the mask would have remained a harmless relic. Without her, it would have lacked its dreadful stagecraft. Each required the other, though one among you dealt the final blow." The murmur of the crowd grew fevered, some siding with the lady, others with the dealer. Lestrade, growing impatient, demanded, "Which one, Holmes? We cannot clap them both in irons on speculation." Holmes placed the mask gently back upon the baize and withdrew from his pocket a small envelope. From it he produced the splinter of glass and the faint trace of crystalline powder we had seen upon Sir Percival's nostrils. "This," he said, holding it to the light, "is the remnant of a preparation of etheric salt carried upon the treated candle. Who possessed the skill to mix such compounds, to time their release with precision? Not the merchant of curios, whose dealings are with metal and parchment. No, it was Lady Aurelia Vale, mistress of lanterns, collector of optics, connoisseur of vapours. She conceived the method. But the glove, the missing right glove, remains, and that, I fancy, will tell us whose hand placed the mask upon Sir Percival's head. He paused, then pointed suddenly to the dealer. "Search him!" The constables obeyed, and within moments produced from Lenoir's pocket a crumpled leather glove, stained faintly at the fingertips with soot. A gasp ran through the room. Lenoir's defiance crumbled into desperation. "She forced me!" he cried, voice breaking. "She threatened to ruin me if I did not obey. I placed the mask, yes, but it was she who taught me how. Without her, I would never have known." Holmes straightened, his expression grave. "Then the truth is plain. The crime was a duet, not a solo. Lady Aurelia Vale devised the science. Lenoir enacted the deed. One provided the whisper, the other fitted the mask. In their vanity, they sought to make a theatre of death, and in so doing have left behind the very props of their downfall." The trustees murmured, scandalized, while Lestrade ordered both prisoners taken away. Aurelia maintained her hauteur to the last, though her eyes blazed with a fury that stripped her smile of its charm. Lenoir sagged like a marionette with its strings cut, muttering half-coherent pleas as he was led from the hall. Holmes remained unmoved, his gaze upon the iron mask as though it were a mirror reflecting the darker corners of human ambition. "You see, Watson," he said softly, "murder is rarely born of need. More often it is the bastard child of pride and vanity. Here we had both, dressed in silk and commerce. The whisper was not of iron, but of ego." I could not help but shiver as I looked at the relic upon the table, its hollow eyes, still blind yet somehow watching. The crowd dispersed, the scandal already spreading in whispers that would soon reach every corner of London. Holmes gathered his evidence without haste, pocketed the fragments, and with a final nod to Lestrade, turned toward the door. As we emerged into the cold air of Kensington, he drew his coat about him and said, "The case is concluded, Watson, though not without melancholy. For in pursuing their vanity, two clever minds joined hands, and together destroyed themselves as surely as they destroyed their victim. It is a lesson worth heeding that the pursuit of spectacle is often more deadly than the bluntest of blades." We rode back to Baker Street in silence, the fog closing behind us, and I found myself reflecting that the whisper in the iron mask would echo in my mind long after the theatre of its crime had been dismantled. The cab rolled steadily through the damp streets, wheels splashing through shallow gutters, the fog lifting just enough to reveal the faint silhouettes of lamp-posts that lined our way home. Holmes sat rigid, his face shadowed in thought, while I allowed myself a measure of relief. The case seemed all but closed, two conspirators exposed, their devices laid bare, and justice ready to take its course. Yet my companion's silence warned me against complacency. I had learned too well that when Holmes's eyes narrowed and his fingers drummed against his knee, some hidden chord of the puzzle remained unsatisfied. At last, as we neared Baker Street, he spoke. "Tell me, Watson, does it strike you as curious that the glove was discovered in Lenoir's pocket, crumpled, like some common rag, when any guilty man of wit would have destroyed such evidence at the first opportunity?" "It may be," I said, "that he lacked the wit you grant him. Panic breeds carelessness. He was seized in a crowd and had little time to rid himself of it." Holmes shook his head, the shadow of a smile tightening his lips. "No, Watson, carelessness is one thing, but this was too neat. The glove fitted our deductions with theatrical precision, like the final act of a stage play. That is precisely what unsettles me. Real life seldom provides such symmetry unless a hand is guiding it. I frowned. But surely, if not Lenoir, then who? You do not mean to suggest Lady Aurelia contrived even his downfall? Holmes's gaze darkened. Consider her conduct. She showed fury at accusation, yes, but she did not break. Lenoir collapsed instantly as though rehearsed to play the villain's part. And what of the etheric preparation? She had the skill, undoubtedly, but we have yet to discover its source. No vials were found in her house, no laboratory, no residue in her lantern slides. Where then was it mixed, and by whom? The cab jolted to a stop, and we ascended to our sitting room. Holmes paced at once, restless as a caged hawk. He snatched his violin and drew a jagged bow across the strings, producing a discordant note that jarred my nerves. "Watson, my dear fellow, we have been given a performance, and like all performances, it carries illusion. We applauded too soon. There is another curtain yet to rise." I seated myself with exasperation. "Holmes, you astonish me. The evidence is plain. Lady Aurelia conceived the scheme. Lenoir executed it. The law will see it so, and I cannot fault them." "Nor can I, yet." He lowered the violin and leaned over me with sudden intensity. "But ask yourself, why would Aurelia, mistress of optics and chemistry, permit the crude hands of Lenoir to fit the mask and risk discovery? Why trust such a bungler? No, Watson, she is cleverer than that. Which means either Lenoir lied in his desperation, or he spoke truth while masking another's hand entirely. The question remains, who whispered and who commanded? Before I could reply, a knock sounded at the door. Lestrade entered, cap in hand, his face flushed with the triumph of officialdom. "They're both locked up," Holmes signed statements, witnesses enough to hang them twice over. "The Yard's delighted with you. The press, too. By tomorrow morning, they'll call it the most sensational case since the Sign of Four." Holmes regarded him coolly. "And yet you look uneasy, Inspector." Lestrade shifted. "Well, between ourselves, I don't mind saying it sits too tidy. Lenoir protests he was but a pawn. Aurelia laughs at us as though we've blundered into a farce. But I've my orders, and they're clear enough. Build the case. Bring it to trial." When he had gone, Holmes resumed his pacing. "You see, Watson, even—"
Lestrade senses the flaw, though he lacks the stomach to pursue it. The essence of this case is performance, and in performance the most dangerous role is not the actor, but the playwright. Aurelia and Lenoir are but puppets dancing at the strings. Somewhere there is a hand we have yet to see. I confess his words unsettled me deeply, for I had been ready to lay the matter to rest. Yet as I considered the curious neatness of the glove's discovery, the improbable perfection of the evidence, and the absence of any true laboratory among Aurelia's possessions, I began to feel the same disquiet. If Holmes's instincts pointed to a hidden figure, I knew better than to dismiss them. That night he worked late into the small hours, poring over his notes, arranging and rearranging the fragments upon the table. I drifted into uneasy slumber in my chair, roused only once when I heard him muttering to himself, "The whisper. Not of iron, but of flesh. Find the whisperer, and the mask falls away." Morning brought a letter, hand-delivered and bearing no signature. Holmes slit it open, scanned the single line and passed it to me. In neat, slanted script it read, "You seek the whisper in the wrong mouth." The mask was only ever a veil. Holmes's eyes burned with sudden fire. "At last, the true hand speaks. Watson, we must return to Kensington at once. There is a chamber beneath the gallery that I had not leisure to examine. I fancy we shall find the whisperer's lair, and with it the author of this play." He thrust his arms into his coat, the letter crushed in his fist, and I followed him into the cold morning air, with my heart pounding. The case that I thought resolved
had burst open once more, and the whisper in the iron mask had begun to sound less like the echo of a solved mystery than the prelude to a deeper and darker revelation still to come. The morning air had the sharp bite of iron as we reached the museum, our breath pale in the chill. The building loomed sombre against the sky, its stones beaded with last night's mist, its great doors opening to admit us into a silence deeper than I had known it to possess before. The galleries were still, their treasures resting beneath sheets of dust-laden light, as though the house itself had conspired to conceal its secret. Holmes strode with rapid steps past the armory, past the lantern-lit corridors, until we descended into a narrow stair that smelled of soot and oil. "This, Watson," he said, holding the anonymous letter aloft, "is where the whisper finds its true mouth." We came to a low chamber beneath the gallery floor. It was a furnace room, smaller than the great stove we had seen earlier, and filled with the acrid tang of burnt chemicals. On a bench beside the vent lay a confusion of objects: a half-empty vial of violet essence, shards of ground glass, and a mask of crude tin that seemed fashioned as an imitation of the iron relic above. Holmes examined each with swift, exacting fingers. "You see," he murmured, "this is no improvisation but a laboratory of illusions. The etheric salts were mixed here, the vapors tested. The whisper through the duct was rehearsed. The entire performance was staged from this very room." As he spoke, I noticed the remnants of candle stubs in a row, their wax stained with an unnatural hue. I touched one and felt the grit of powder clinging to its wick. "Holmes," I said, "who but the staff could have access here?" "Surely Plimpton or his porters." Holmes's eyes flashed. "Plimpton, yes." "The curator, whose hands never left the key ring, who professed ignorance of chemistry, yet described with suspicious precision the perfume of violets, a man overshadowed by Sir Percival's authority, and eager for influence among his peers. It was he who owned this chamber, Watson. Aurelia and Lenoir may have lent their knowledge, but the stage belonged to him." He held up a slip of paper found beneath the vials. Upon it were sketched strange symbols, half Latin, half cipher, with the phrase "muta feria" repeated in several hands. Holmes studied it grimly. "This is rehearsal script, Watson. They practiced the scene as one would rehearse an opera. One voice to whisper, one to affix the mask, one to supply the artifice, and behind them all, the director, Plimpton." Even as he spoke, footsteps echoed above. A moment later, Lestrade descended, lantern in hand, his brow furrowed. "Holmes, what devil's hole is this?" "My men found the door unlatched just this morning." "Unlatched, Inspector," Holmes replied evenly, "because its master has fled. Did you search his lodgings?" Lestrade looked uneasy. "We did. The bed's unslept, his trunk half-packed, papers gone. Blast it, Holmes, if you're right. The fellow's on the run." Holmes tapped the bench with a forefinger. "He cannot run far. The scent of violets clings, the soot stains his hand. He has left us the playhouse entire, and it will hang him." We returned to the gallery where the iron mask still glared from its case, now under lock and guard. The trustees, summoned in haste, crowded in once more, their faces pale with fear of further scandal. Holmes addressed them with quiet authority. "Gentlemen, you have pursued shadows in Lady Aurelia and Lenoir. They are guilty, yes, but not of murder. Their talents were harnessed by another, the very man entrusted with your collections. Julius Plimpton, your curator, has transformed this museum into a theatre of death. He arranged the duct, the candles, the mask. He whispered through his vent while others played their parts, and in doing so he made a spectacle of your trust. He is the whisperer, and he alone directed the performance,
that slew Sir Percival. A gasp rose from the company. One trustee cried that Plimpton had been seen late last night, slipping from the museum, cloak drawn tight. Another muttered that his accounts showed curious expenses for chemicals and supplies. The truth spread like fire among them, each recollection now pointing to guilt. Holmes, however, remained vigilant. "Do not mistake this as conclusion, Watson," he said softly to me. "The Whisperer has shed one mask, but he may yet wear another. A desperate man will turn predator when cornered." As if to prove him right, a constable burst into the gallery, breathless. "Inspector, a body at the river stairs, cloaked, and with a key ring still on his belt. It may be the curator." We hurried at once, the cold wind cutting at our faces as we reached the embankment. There, upon the wet stones, lay the form of Julius Plimpton, water lapping at his boots, his eyes wide in eternal astonishment. The key ring clattered as Lestrade bent to examine him. "Dead by his own hand, perhaps," Lestrade muttered. "A coward's flight." Holmes crouched beside the body, his gaze sharp. He touched the man's wrist, examined the lips, then shook his head. "No, Inspector, this is no suicide. The Whisperer has been silenced. He was strangled with a thin cord, see the mark. His killer took no time, yet left him here to be found with his keys. Another curtain falls, Watson, and we are still in the stalls." I felt a chill deeper than the river's breath. Then the true hand. "Still at large," Holmes said grimly. "Plimpton was a player, yes, but not the playwright. He could direct no more than the tools he was given. Someone else orchestrated this drama, someone who remains unseen, who now tidies loose ends with ruthless efficiency. The mask was their stage, the whisper their overture, but the play is not yet done. We face an enemy of cunning beyond what I suspected." As we turned from the river, the iron-grey water sucking at the stones behind us, I realized with a shudder that the whisper in the iron mask had not been silenced at all. It had only shifted, moving deeper into shadow, preparing for an encore that promised to be darker and more perilous than anything we had yet endured. Holmes walked ahead, his shoulders set, his mind already racing toward the unseen adversary. And I, though weary, felt the same dread certainty. The true revelation was yet to come. The wind from the river chased us back toward Baker Street, its damp chill seeping through cloak and coat alike, but it was not the cold that tightened my nerves, it was the sight of Julius Plimpton's body lying lifeless on the embankment stones. Holmes did not speak for some time as we rode, his eyes fixed on the passing lamps, his thoughts turned inward. When at last we returned to our sitting room, he flung himself into his armchair, his pipe clenched but unlit, and stared at the fire as though the flames might shape themselves into the face of the hidden adversary. "Watson," he said at length, "this case began with a whisper, and it will end with a silence. But not yet. The hand that silenced Plimpton is still at work, trimming loose ends. With precision, do you not see? Plimpton was too clumsy to have contrived the full scheme. He served as intermediary, useful, obedient, expendable. Now he is discarded. The true playwright remains behind the curtain. I tried to argue that Aurelia and Lenoir still languished in custody, both sufficiently compromised to explain the affair. Holmes's eyes flickered to me with a trace of pity. "My dear fellow, they are pawns, not queens. Aurelia supplied her knowledge, Lenoir his access, but neither possessed the cool detachment required to eliminate Plimpton without trace or witness. No, this last act was the work of one who values concealment above pride, a mind that writes in whispers
rather than boasts. Before I could respond, there came a knock at the door. Lestrade entered, his expression worn by fatigue. He tossed his gloves onto the table. "The yard's in uproar, Holmes. Plimpton's death has muddied the waters. Some think it's suicide, others murder. The press is clamouring, and my superiors want the matter closed before Parliament makes a spectacle of it. I hope you've some clarity, because I've none." Holmes regarded him with a keen glint. "Clarity comes when we examine not what is present, but what is absent. At the river, Inspector, did you notice what was missing from Plimpton's person?" Lestrade frowned. "Nothing that I recall. He had his keys." "Precisely. He had his keys. A man fleeing for his life does not carry the very tokens that betray his office. They were left deliberately, placed so that his death would proclaim his guilt to the public. It was a stage dressing, Inspector, and you are the intended audience." Lestrade swore softly under his breath. "Then someone killed him to pin the whole play on him." "Exactly. And if we ask who benefits most by having both Aurelia, Lenoir, and Plimpton discredited, the circle narrows. Consider Sir Percival's report. The fraudulence of the mask was but one matter. He was preparing to denounce mismanagement, theft, and corruption in the museum's finances. That, Watson, is the true engine behind this crime. The mask was but a lure, a distraction to catch our eye, while subtler hands swept the ledgers clean." He rose abruptly, pacing as his words quickened. "I recall a remark made by one trustee at our first meeting, that Sir Percival was acid of tongue and feared by all who dallied in their duties. Who among them had most to lose by his exposure? Not Aurelia with her lanterns, not Lenoir with his wares, not Plimpton with his keys, but a man with the purse strings, a man whose signature flows across every account." I started. "You mean the treasurer, Lord Elmhurst?" Holmes's lips curved in grim satisfaction. "The very one! Reserved, discreet, and present at every gathering, yet silent when the scandal broke. Too silent. He let Aurelia and Lenoir bear the spotlight, while Plimpton played the fool. Meanwhile, the financial records vanish, and with them the proof of his theft. Percival threatened to expose him, therefore Percival had to die. Before we could pursue the matter further, a messenger arrived with a sealed envelope addressed to Holmes. He broke it open and read aloud, "If you value truth, come tonight to the bell tower of St. Dunstan's before the hour strikes 12. Come alone. The Whisper is waiting." Lestrade cursed. "A trap, plain as day." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Yes, Inspector, and yet traps reveal the trapper, provided one steps with care. Watson, you and Lestrade will remain hidden near the tower. I shall go where invited, and the Whisperer, believing himself unseen, will at last speak aloud." That night, the three of us made our way to the ancient church, its tower looming black against the mist, the bell silent in its loft. Holmes entered first, his footsteps echoing faintly on the stone. Lestrade and I concealed ourselves in the shadows beyond the nave, scarcely daring to breathe. Midnight neared. The silence was so profound that the ticking of my watch seemed a thunderous betrayal. Then a figure detached itself from the gloom of the stairwell, cloaked and hooded. The voice that issued forth was low, deliberate, and carried with it that peculiar cadence I had heard only once before, in the dignified tones of Lord Elmhurst, treasurer of the museum. "You should not have meddled, Holmes," the whisper said. "Plimpton was meant to satisfy your curiosity, but you pressed too far. You forced my hand." Holmes's reply was calm, almost mocking. "On the contrary, my lord, you revealed your hand the moment you silenced him. You mistake me if you think whispers in towers or masks will save you now." The figure advanced, a glint of steel in his hand, but in that instant Lestrade and I leapt from our concealment. A struggle ensued. The knife clattered upon the stones, and within moments Lord Elmhurst was subdued, his cloak torn back, his face pale with fury and ruin. Holmes straightened, brushing the dust from his sleeves. "The play is finished," he said. "The whisper in the iron mask was but your overture, my lord, but tonight the curtain falls." As the bells tolled midnight above us, their solemn peal drowned his muttered denials, and I felt the weight of finality settle at last. Yet even then I could not rid myself of the memory of that mask, mute and terrible, nor of the voice that had slithered through iron to reach us. And though Elmhurst was led away in chains, I knew the echo of that whisper would haunt me long after the case was closed, a reminder that even in the heart of London's museums and parlours, darkness could weave its drama as cunningly as any stage, waiting only for Holmes to pull aside the veil. The trial of Lord Elmhurst stirred London society as few scandals had done in recent years. The newspapers fed hungrily upon every detail, the treasurer of a venerable institution accused not only of theft and fraud, but of orchestrating one of the most elaborate murders in memory. The iron mask of Saint-Aubin, once a mere curiosity, became infamous, its blind slits staring from every illustrated sheet in the city. Lady Aurelia was released, her reputation in tatters but her freedom intact. Lenoir, though fined and censured for his part, escaped the gallows by virtue of Holmes's testimony that he had been manipulated by stronger wills. Only Elmhurst bore the full weight of justice, condemned by the trail of vanished funds and by his own desperate attempt to silence Plimpton, the accomplice who might have betrayed him. In Baker Street the matter reached its quieter conclusion. Holmes sat before the fire, his long fingers steepled, his eyes reflecting both triumph and weariness. "You see, Watson," he said, "every element of this crime was arranged to distract Aurelia's science, Lenoir's access, Plimpton's keys. They were pieces upon the board, moved by Elmhurst with the precision of a chess player. But he erred in his vanity. He believed that a whisper through iron would forever conceal the voice behind it. He forgot that the simplest truths, the smell of violets, the glove too easily discovered, the silence too perfect, betray the grandest illusions. I asked whether he felt satisfaction in having unmasked so cunning an adversary. Holmes shook his head. "Satisfaction is for those who seek applause, my dear fellow. I seek only accuracy. The tragedy here is not merely the death of Sir Percival, but that men and women of talent, Aurelia with her optics, Lenoir with his craft, allowed themselves to be drawn into a drama that ended in ruin. Elmhurst appealed to their vanity, and vanity is a more deadly poison than ether. In the end, it was not iron that killed Sir Percival, but pride dressed in iron's clothing." I could not deny the justice of his words, though I confess my own heart clung more to the human pathos than the intellectual pattern. The museum reopened in due time, the mask sealed away in a private vault, its legend forever darkened. The trustees bowed their heads to public shame, and the city moved on as cities do to newer scandals and fresher spectacles. Yet for me the case lingered. For many nights afterward I would dream of the armory's silence, of the candle guttering beside the iron mask, of the faint hiss of air through the vent that seemed to carry not merely sound but intention. And always I would wake with Holmes's voice echoing in my mind. When iron is said to be mute, it has almost certainly spoken. The question is, to whom and by what channel? On a quiet evening, some weeks later, as we sat once more in our familiar room, I remarked that the case seemed to me unique among all we had encountered, a blend of science, theatre, and fraud, unlike any other. Holmes smiled faintly, reaching for his violin. "Unique, perhaps, but the world is full of whisperers, Watson. They may not always wear masks of iron, but they cloak themselves in 1,000 guises: respectability, charm, wealth. It is our task to hear through the disguises, to strip away the echo and find the voice. With that he drew the bow across the strings, and the low note filled the room, rich and resonant, a whisper transmuted into music. I sat back, warmed by the fire, struck once again by the strange contrast of my friend, the coldest reason joined to the most delicate art. And so the case of the whisper in the iron mask was laid to rest, though its shadow, like the music of his violin, lingered in memory long after the final chord had faded.